Hello all. Let's study about some of the basic concepts of computer before moving on to the actual C programming language. So it says, whenever we look into a computer, so what exactly a computer is? So all of us know it's a hardware device, right? I mean, it's basically looks like a machine. And why do we use this machine? It's basically to get some work done, right? So in order to get some work done, we need an input, and so that's called as an input. And whatever result that you are executing is called as the output. So moving on to some of the main units, okay, of a computer is the first thing is the input, as I just now I said about input. That's the keyboard and the mouse. So all of us would have seen, okay. So any input that we would want to give would be through the keyboard and through the mouse. And the next thing is the CPU. So the CPU is something we call it as a processor. So it's called a central processing unit. So why do we need a processor? For example, let's take an example. Okay, like why do you think that we need to process the input in order to get the output? So let's take a simple example of let's take maybe a vending machine, right? So when we look at the scenario of vending machine, yes, so there is some input that we would give, and that system would actually process it, and it would help us get the required input. So it's basically processing, which means it is trying to understand, it's trying to analyze so that we get the right output. So moving on to the next one, that's the memory. Okay. So our systems require memory, like how we require memory to store something into our brains. So similarly, our system requires memory, right? So there are basically two kinds of memory. One is called as the primary memory, and then the other one is called as secondary memory. And we also have something called as volatile and non-volatile memory. And the next thing, what we look into is the output. That is, the output is always being displayed on the screen when it comes to a system. So let's say we want to print the output, then we can use printer, which is actually an extra hardware device that we can attach to our system. So the next thing that is moving on to the software versus the hardware. So what exactly software is? So software is something that we cannot see, right? These are set of instructions that we give to the system in order to get the required output. And what do you mean by the hardware? The things that we can see, the physical components of a computer. So that's called as the hardware. So some of the examples here they've given, the hardware is the keyboard, mouse, and the CPU. And with respect to the software, the various applications that we can install. And when we say applications are operating system, okay, that means the software and OS is actually the operating system that we are using itself is a software, right? On which we are trying to install several applications. So this is all about the software and the hardware. And so now moving on to what is called as programming, right? So first thing that we all can think about is like why do we need to write programs? What's the basic purpose, right? It's basically helping us to get a task done easier, basically automation of the task and trying to solve the real world problems. So our program should, whatever we write as a program should be able to, provide solution, not just, for simple thing, for simple applications, but also we can, try applying them and trying, to integrate them to in order to solve the complex real world problems also. Okay. So that's why we are using programming. And before we try to code or before we try to write a program, the first thing that we need to know is something called as an algorithm. So what exactly an algorithm is? So here it says they're trying to do it's a step-by-step instruction in order to solve a given problem. So here they've just given an algorithm to make t or to calculate the sum of two numbers. So as usual, as we all know in all our day-to-day activities, okay, we follow a procedure. It can be any activity for that matter, right? Okay, so we have a certain procedure and we feel that yes, okay, if I would follow this procedure, then my task would become easier, then it might give me the right output. But it also depends upon the steps that we are using in the procedure. For example, okay, let's say making a cup of coffee or a tea. So what are the steps that we would take? What are the ingredients that we require? So these are some of the important things that we need to understand And hence, before writing any program, it's important that we write an algorithm, clearly, write down the steps as to, which should be the first one, which should be the second one, and so on. And after that is what comes the flowchart. That means whatever we have represented in the form of text, okay, we need to represent that in the form of flowchart. So now, why do we need a chart? As you all know, a chart is a better, it's having a better visual representation when compared to the plain text, right? So and hence, okay, a flowchart is that important. So in a flowchart, we use so many symbols, okay, like start and end of the process, and I know the exact process. Suppose you want to initialize certain variables or declare certain variables, then we in the process, okay, of let's say maybe calculating two numbers. So we write that in the form of a rectangle. Okay, within a rectangle and the decision making. So what do you mean by decision making? Now, whenever we say a decision, okay, it might have two things, right? One is it might have two, things, or let's say it might have two sides, but depending upon what kind of problem it might be. Suppose if it is true, or suppose if it is false, then what is the decision that our computer, our system can actually make, right? So that is what we are trying to put within the decision statements. Okay, so this is a simple example of how a flowchart would look like. Yeah, just now explained. Okay, so the start of the process. Let's say here we are trying to multiply two numbers. So the input is we need two numbers. That's the input. So that input can be a comma b. Maybe you can take a is 10 and b is 20. Now what's the thing? What is the product, or I would say the result of these two numbers, the multiplication? Let's say 10 into 20. Okay, so that should give me the product. And finally, I need to print the product. Okay, so this is, and after that, after you get the result, that's where you've got to stop the process, right? So hence it is end. So this is a simple way of representing it through a flowchart. And the next thing, just now I just explained about an algorithm. Okay, it's step-by-step procedure. Can you just see? Okay, start. Okay, declare the variable, declaration. That means you need to declare. What do you mean by declaring? Okay, just telling that, yeah, so these are the variables that I'm using in my program. Yeah, so that's called as declaration. The next thing is we're trying to read the value. So definitely with num1 and num2, definitely you can't add anything. You need to give a value to that, right? Only then you can add, or only then you can get the end result, right? So we are just trying to read that particular value. Yeah. Then what we do is we are then calculating the sum. Sum equal to the value of num1 plus the value of num2. And then we try to display the value of sum, and hence the procedure stops. So that's all for today, students. Okay. We shall meet in the next class.